This summer, I took a little video of myself attending a Democratic town hall. Now, this was the first Democratic event that I've ever attended in my entire life, and I just turned 51 years old a couple weeks ago. And the reason it's my first Democratic event is that I was a hardcore Republican for the first 49 years of my life. So I took this little video. I went to see a couple of politicians, including our local mayor and Gabby Gifford, who I've always had so much respect for, her husband, Mark Kelly, and Cory Booker. And it's funny because politics is not something that I normally talk about on my channel at all. But I decided to post this video one day and talk about my journey out of Christian nationalism, white supremacy, Mormonism, and MAGA, and my visit to the Democratic town hall, thinking that not a single person in the world would care. In fact, I expected to get maybe 50 views on that video, again, because it's not my normal topic of conversation. And I didn't realize that leaving MAGA was even a thing. And then I woke up the next morning and realized that it was a thing. And you guys, I really only realized it was a thing because of the number of views. And then I went through YouTube and also Googled ex-MAGA, people leaving MAGA, and realized that that's a talking point that people actually are interested in. So here we are. So I spent the rest of the summer talking about my journey out of my huge alt-right Mormon prepper community that was full of a lot of hate and fear and just mindless obedience to the leaders. My journey out of Christian nationalism, white supremacy, and how I've come to be over here on the other side. And as I share my journey, I get a lot of questions. And obviously the biggest question on everybody's minds is, what made me leave? How did I get to the other side? And I think one of the big reasons you guys ask me that is that you have somebody in your life that has fallen into that crowd, and you're wondering if there's hope for you, and if so, how you can encourage them to wake up and see the light. And maybe you don't have any MAGA people in your life, but you live in America and you're afraid of what's going on, and you're hoping that other people like me can change. So today I'm going to dive into my personal story out of MAGA and what prompted it all. I'm Jenny Gage, and this is Life Take 2. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks for following along on this journey. And thank you for all of the conversations that we're having in my comments. I don't always get a chance to respond, but when I'm reading through, it's beautiful to see people thinking and people with opposing viewpoint coming together and discussing. Now, this video has no script. I don't even have my normal bullet points in front of me that I like to work off of, because I just wanted to kind of organically share my story. Now, this is going to be a 2-part video series. Tomorrow, I'll post a carefully researched video where I share tips to help people in your life come off of the MAGA ledge and step away from the cult just a little bit. So stay tuned for that. Today, I just want to share. And it's really important to point out right from the get-go here that I didn't just wake up one day and decide to leave the Republican Party and Donald Trump. I left everything. And it was actually stepping away from my religion and then stepping away from all religion and everything that I had ever known, literally everything, we'll get into that here, that then by default, as a side effect, led me to no longer resonate with Donald Trump, with his ideologies, his policy, and with the MAGA party that had been a huge part of my life as a whole. If you haven't caught some of my other videos, I'll link a couple of them in the description. All I want to say here about my past with MAGA is that it was my entire identity, and I was deeply committed to Donald Trump and to everybody in the Republican Party, to the point that my entire social media page, my Facebook and my Instagram, in my personal life for a long time were just platforms where I could support and promote Donald Trump. I even had Donald Trump as my personal profile picture, and I was constantly writing these little love letter to Trump posts and supporting and promoting him. I was all in. How all in was I? I was as all in as you could possibly be, just short of actually working for Fox News. So first, a little basic background understanding into mind control, high demand religions, and organizations like the Mormon Church and the MAGA Party. Because we live in such a melting pot of different ideologies And my neighbor across the street might be a Democrat, and the other one might be a Republican, and somebody else might be a libertarian. And we might have lesbians and a Catholic priest all like mixed up together. We no longer live in isolated societies where people have very similar ideologies. It's actually really easy to control people when everybody in a tribe believes all the same things. The way we do things in America, the way that we're all mixed up like that, means that rather than keeping you inside of that little isolated area, they have to keep your brain controlled. And that's what happened to me. I was born and raised into the Mormon church. And on my mom's side, we were multi-generational Mormon. So my mom had never known anything but the Mormon church. And her parents had joined the church quite young. And great-grandparents had joined the church relatively young. So I was born to a family that was deeply devout and really didn't have any outside views. My mom had no idea what it was like to not be a Mormon, and she had been raised very much controlled by her Mormon community. So her number one goal, and the goal of all of my youth leaders and college professors and my grandparents and my huge, big, extended family and all of my neighbors and seminary teachers and everything, was to just keep my little brain in Mormonism. And they did that fairly thoroughly. Mormonism isn't just one of these church on Sunday type of religions where then like maybe you're Catholic and you go to church on Sunday, but your friends are Lutherans and atheists and whatever. As a Mormon, all of my friends were Mormons. All of my family was Mormon. I was only allowed to date Mormon. I wasn't really allowed to go to friends' birthday parties or slumber parties if they weren't Mormon. I lived in a very isolated little Mormon bubble. Mormonism is why I was Christian nationalist, by the way, because the Book of Mormon teaches that God literally made America as a promised land and that he only brings people to America who are chosen by him, that this land is preserved for his most righteous children, and that we as members of the church were to fight to preserve this nation as not just a Christian nation, but also as a Mormon nation. So Christian nationalism was just a natural outcropping of my religion, to the point that my family and my community mixed America with the gospel like they were both the same. I believed that the Constitution had been written by the hand of God, just like the commandments that Moses, the tablets that he had brought down from Mount Sinai. I believe that the Constitution had been scripted by God just exactly like that. And just like Moses and his people had been brought out of Egypt across the Red Sea, I believed that Christopher Columbus had been led across the ocean to the new promised land by the hand of God. My community was obsessed with Boy Scouts of America and Flag Day and the 4th of July. We always had these huge congregational pancake breakfasts on the 4th of July. And there were patriotic songs right in the hymn book, like God Bless America, like the national anthem. They're sacred songs. So all of those things were my absolute reality. Just like I knew that the sun was going to come up in the morning and the sky was blue and the grass was green, I knew that Heavenly Father had created this beautiful land of America and that Joseph Smith was true prophet and that the gospel was true and the Book of Mormon was a real testament of the Indians who had lived here on the American continent. That stuff was my reality. Part of that reality was also being Republican, and that was because the Democrats tended to lean more towards women's lib, which was a sin according to Mormon doctrine, because the traditional family is the foundation of everything, so only Satan would want women to go out and work. We believed that divorce had started because women started to work, because the Democrats were fine with killing babies, and Democrats had been the ones who had legalized gay marriage, which I believe was the greatest abomination on the face of the earth. So for those reasons, the Democratic Party to me was literally a group of Satanists. And that stuff might have been my reality forever if my parents had homeschooled me, if maybe I hadn't had TV and the internet, and if I hadn't started working, see, like that's the devil, right? Women's led, but at home for a multi-level marketing essential oil company that honestly was one of the big kinks in my MAGA life. And if I hadn't ever been ordered to see a therapist. Again, all of these ideologies about Mormonism and America and Christian nationalism and white supremacy, they were just my reality. I was IQ tested, and 2 days a week, I was bussed out to a special school for gifted students. That was a big thing in the 80s and 90s. And this gifted class didn't just teach us memorization and stuff. I spent an entire school day, depending on the school year, between 1 and 2 days a week, learning critical thinking skills and problem solving on a level that I wasn't getting in my normal classroom. I was 8 years old, and I learned how to take data and analyze it and draw conclusions, how to form a hypothesis. We learned to research and investigate and draw conclusions, even if we didn't have complete data. For example, one of my projects that year when I was 8 years old was about the Titanic, which hadn't been discovered yet. The shipwreck of the Titanic was still buried, who knows where. And we had to go through all of the data of the last communication from the Titanic, where it had been. And then we had to do mathematical formulations around tidal drift and things like that to speculate where the Titanic might be. And then we had to write a newspaper report as though we had discovered the Titanic. We also had to speculate things like decomposition. Would there be any skeletal remains? Would there still be any artifacts if the Titanic had struck the bottom of the sea? Could it be buried? We had to speculate and come up with all of these things. And here's what's funny. My public school education was really at odds with my religious upbringing, because in my religion, I was learning to memorize scriptures. I was learning to memorize the things that the prophets told me. I was learning to memorize the commandments and just obey. In fact, when I was a little girl, we used to sing this song in our Mormon primary class, which is the youth ministry, that goes, "Do as I'm doing, follow, follow me." And you literally follow somebody in doing something. And the reason that part of the youth ministry is it's teaching you to follow the prophet. There's another youth ministry song that literally says, "Follow the prophet, follow the prophet, follow the prophet, he knows the way." And you march around the room as a little child as though you're following the prophet, like you're walking behind him. There's another one. "I will go, I will do the things the Lord commands. I know the Lord provides a way, he wants me to obey." Obedience was honestly the only thing that I was getting out of my religious community. And it's the only thing that I would have gotten out of my religious community. And honestly, if my parents had homeschooled me, everything probably would have been fine. But again, my public school education taught me not just to obey and not just to accept the facts in front of me, but to gather data, critically think, and form hypotheses. So at age 8, I was set to be baptized into the Mormon church. And that year, we were presented in our youth ministry class with all of the details in the Mormon gospel, including Joseph Smith and the golden plates and the Book of Mormon and all of those little juicy nuggets of the gospel. And I can still remember the Sunday that my teacher, Sister Say, presented to us the story of the Book of Mormon and the golden plate. And what a miracle it was that God had hidden up these golden records that the Indians had written so that Joseph Smith could find them in the early 1830s, late 1820s. And I was in this critically thinking class. So I started to critically think about it. And I raised my hand in class. I don't remember everything that I said. But I was really excited by this information. I was literally so excited thinking that Heavenly Father didn't just have the Bible that was 2,000 years old, but that we also had this new scripture. So excited. So I raised my hand with a couple of questions. One of my questions was, where are the gold plates? Are they in a museum? Can I go see them? And the teacher told me that an angel had taken them up to heaven so that nobody could see them. That really bothered me. That would continue to bother me. And I also asked, has anyone independent of Joseph Smith discovered similar record that would support the data? And the teacher was like, I have absolutely no idea. Now, at age 8, that didn't cause me to leave the church. I would be thoroughly brainwashed and indoctrinated into the Mormon religion until I learned to gaslight myself and doubt my doubts in really significant ways. But the things I was learning along the way, how to critically think, would just degrade everything eventually. So I would eventually grow up and get married and become a Mormon trad wifey by the time I was 20 years old and just live a very Christian nationalist, white supremacist, Mormon, trad wifey, alt-right, prepper sort of life. Then, Mormon women aren't supposed to work. Trad wives don't work, right? But multi-level marketing jobs, they're kind of okay because you can work from home. And so I started working with a friend who had joined this essential oil multi-level marketing company. And I was selling oils everywhere I could. I was doing classes at my home. And some of my friends and neighbors would invite other friends and neighbors to my classes. This broadened my community and my network outside of just my Mormon ward. I started meeting people in my own neighborhood that I had never met before and people outside of my neighborhood. And suddenly I started having this whole slew of lesbians who signed up for my MLM. I know a lot of people think that my old life fell apart because of my ex-husband, Jake, but that's actually not why. He had no part. None of that had anything to do with me leaving. It was actually my lesbian friends. doTERRA team, like there they were, and they became personal friends of mine. And for the first time, I saw into the lives and behaviors of the boogeymen, and they were amazing. And then my brain started comparing and doing some critical thinking, and I realized all these lesbians in my essential oil company downline are way nicer and have far better, happier lives than the people that go to church with me on Sunday, people in my family, other people in my community. That realization, I will tell you, put my brain into so many mental gymnastics that I could not possibly control. Then we got the computer in our home, and I had never really had a computer before. And I was really late to getting like a smartphone, and I got on Facebook, and that allowed me to see a peek across the world. And what I realized is that some of the hatred and bigotry that was coming from my community towards other people was completely unwarranted. Literally access to just seeing the world through social media and through the internet. It kind of proved to me that my religious leaders and people in my political party were just liars. But I found ways to quell those scares and keep believing in the church and stay part of the community. And I just chalked all of those doubts up to Satan anyway, so I didn't really care much about them, but those little seeds had been planted. And then my abusive marriage got so bad that I was ordered to see a therapist. Now, this was something that I had never done before. I believed that the gospel and the scriptures and Heavenly Father, my priesthood leaders, and just my personal prayers had the answers to everything. Jesus was my healer. I didn't need some shrink getting in my head and teaching me weird thoughts that were of the devil, but I was ordered. I had to. So I went and saw a therapist, and that therapist would be one of the big straws that broke the camel's back. Let me tell you specifically how that happened. He taught me how to listen to myself. My therapist didn't ever tell me, like, leave your husband or, like, maybe don't go to your church because it seems like it's harming your life. He just made me look inside for the first time, and he taught me that you're not supposed to feel crappy all the time. That's not Satan testing you. That just means that you have a crappy life. He taught me it's okay to feel happy. In fact, you should feel happy. So he kind of taught me internalized critical thinking. That if something's going on in your life and you're not feeling good, look around and see if you can figure out why your life is so unhappy. Let me give you one example of that. Mormons are obsessed with family dinners. Like the family that eats together, stays together, and family dinner for us was a big deal because I was a trad wife, so we had all this homemade food. We'd often have our family prayer and scripture study as part of dinner. We wanted everyone together all the time, unless they had sports or a job or something. Our whole entire family sat down for this big family meal every single night for decades. I was the cook. I was the cleanup crew. I was everything. I really had this religious belief in family dinners. It's a big deal. One day, my therapist just throws out to me, he says, it seems like we have a lot of conversations around dinner, you being abused during dinner or immediately after dinner by Jake, and you exhibiting a lot of stress around mealtime. Yeah, I'm cooking all this homemade food. We have a bunch of kids, and it's like a bad time of day where everybody's just coming home from school and they have homework, and we're transporting to sports practices right after and things like that. And also, I was married to a dick. So mealtime wasn't particularly enjoyable. Nothing was enjoyable. The only enjoyable thing was just not being around him. Of note, I still have so much trauma around mealtime that my therapist has had to work through that PTSD And it's only been about a year that I've been able to sit down face to face with my own partner and my teenagers, and especially other strangers at dinner time, either in my own home or at a restaurant, without having PTSD panic attacks that can potentially end me up in an ambulance and in the hospital because of the abuse that I suffered at mealtime. My family mealtimes growing up were horrible too. And so dinner is not a happy place for me to be. And my therapist just pointed that out one day. And he said, maybe there's another solution to that. Why don't you experiment and see if there's another way to eat meals that makes you a little bit happier? He challenged me to find myself a TV tray. I actually stopped at a garage sale on the way home from therapy that day. They had a 50-cent TV tray that I still have in my dresser that we are going to literally use in my movie. This exact TV tray will be in my movie. I dug it out. This TV tray changed my... So that night, I bought myself a lobster tail, like a little side salad. And instead of cooking and eating dinner as a whole family, I had got my kids some TV dinner. And I sat down at my TV tray in front of my favorite show. And I told everyone, hey, don't bother mommy. You guys do your thing. I'm going to do my thing. And it was the first meal in decades that I had eaten that I was actually happy. And I started to learn to look inward and see what made me happy. Therapy did that. Therapy, being taught to look inward, would eventually corrode my belief in the Mormon church, Christian nationalism, white supremacy, Donald Trump, MAGA, and everything else that I stood for. It would completely unravel my entire identity. It wasn't very long after that, maybe 2 years later, that one day I went to my Mormon church like I always did, and I believed in the church. I didn't have any doubts. And I was sitting in the women's group. It's called Relief Society. It's the third hour of church, just surrounded by women. And the lesson that day was on the evils of homosexuality. I had fought against gay marriage. I'd always believed that gay people were the worst people in the world. But now I had these lesbian friends, and they were the nicest people in the world. And I looked inside and I realized, oh my God, this is making me feel terrible. Like, I don't want to sit here and listen to this for an hour. So 10 minutes in, I left the Mormon church. I was 44 years old. I had been a faithful, believing member from birth. I left the Mormon church and I have never been back. 2 weeks later, I caught my Mormon returned missionary husband of 24 years picking up the very last 19-year-old escort that he would ever cheat on me with. I'll link an article in the description from my Substack where I talk about how I had to stay with him for 3 years after I discovered a double life because I was a trad wife and I couldn't go anywhere. And I was still a trad wife and I had no money of my own. I had no job. I had nothing. But that night, when I discovered everything and this all went down, I looked inside and I asked myself, how is this making you feel? And I remember looking him in the face that one last time and realizing, I actually hate this man. I don't want to be with him. He doesn't deserve to be my husband. And so when I found him in bed that night, I snapped my fingers and woke him up and said, a man who does this to me doesn't ever deserve to sleep in bed beside me again. So you can stay the night. And tomorrow morning, our marriage is over. I'm filing for divorce. Therapy. A week after I left the Mormon church, I went to a Christian church and I became a hardcore Christian for the next 4.5 years. My theory was the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith had just kept me from knowing Jesus and having a relationship with him. And so I threw myself as deeply into Christianity as I had Mormonism. But unfortunately, with therapy and with critical thinking skills, I had started to really analyze the Bible and I had started to pay attention to how I felt when I read it. And I started to realize that as I was reading the scriptures to my children, and not just the Old Testament, but also the New Testament, and basically going to church with my children, that it made me feel like crap. I just didn't like the Bible. It was hateful. It was judgmental. It was misogynistic and racist and really horrifying. And outside of some of the philosophies of Yeshua that are relatively refreshing, the Bible was not something that I wanted to consume anymore. And church wasn't resonating with me. But here's the straw that broke the camel's back. And this is really important because a lot of people on my channel think that I became atheist because of the Mormon church. Like, the Mormon church destroyed my relationship with God. No, the Christian church did that. I was devoutly Christian for 4.5 years. And my participation in Christianity and actually reading the Bible multiple times during that era were why I broke up with Jesus. Here's one of the straws that broke the camel's back. In our congregation, we had a deaf interpreter, and she stood at the front of the church. And one day we sat right behind this row of deaf people that were watching her intently during the church service. And afterwards, she sat down next to this group of people. It was a woman and some small children. And I had never met the interpreter before, so I just said hello. So she introduced herself to us and then introduced us to her wife. They were a lesbian couple. And they were also special needs foster parents. So all of the children sitting on the row with them were foster children, some of whom they had adopted. And it was so refreshing to me to see lesbians in church because Mormons don't do that. I asked if she had a Bible study group and invited her to come to our Bible study group. And she said that she would in 2 weeks. So the next week I went to the teacher that I knew was going to be instructing the following week's Bible study. And I just told him after class, I said, hey, I've invited a new couple. They've never been before. And I want to make sure that they feel really welcome. And also they're lesbians. So let's just make sure that we're really kind and embracing, because I know that that can be challenging sometimes to feel accepted at church. And this Bible study instructor said, well, if they're lesbians, then I'm probably going to have to really warn them about what God says in the Bible about lesbianism, because it's our duty as Christians to make sure that they are warned. I don't want them to commit sin. This is actually so hard for me to talk about. This moment right here is actually when I left Christianity. I burned my Bible, I think the next week, and I left religion behind forever. This conversation right here. This man, he looked so nice. And I had known him for a while. We'd gone to this church for a few years. And to hear the hateful things coming out of his mouth, and then to see him flip through this book and read all of these scriptures to me was so jarring. Like, I just wanted to invite the lesbian translator from the church to come to a Bible study group, right? And I'm like, you know that she is officially the sign language translator for the church. He's like, yes, I know that, but that doesn't mean that the church is okay with lesbianism. And as I talked to other pastors and other people in the church, I realized that, yeah, they were fine with her being there to sign on Sundays, but they also believed that she was a sinner and that she was going to hell. And I'm sitting there in that class just thinking of all of these special needs foster kids that they were sheltering and nurturing and providing lives for. And I knew that what this church, what the Bible, what Christians were teaching about homosexuality was just wrong. A few weeks later, members of this Christian congregation would also treat myself and my family and my teenage son in really cruel, horrible ways. And when I stepped away from the group, I had people going out of their way to attack me for stepping away from Christianity. Like literal face-to-face conversations with people that I ran into around town, because I live in a relatively small town, about how I was literally going to hell and taking my kids with. I started to really pay attention during that time span to where I felt peace and where I saw people who were emotionally healthy, who were kind and supportive and empathetic, who were exhibiting behaviors that reflected the values that I felt were important. And then not long after that, we came into this like pre-campaign era in the presidential race. And I turned on my Fox News like I always had, and I started listening to Donald Trump, and I still got a bunch of MAGA newsletters in my emails and things like that. And I started really reading them because, yeah, the church isn't true. And I wasn't married anymore, and my whole life had turned upside down. And I was no longer Christian, and the Bible, and like, am I going to see my grandma when I die? Like, I was plunged into this nihilistic void and had such a loss of identity, but I was still rooted in the Republican Party, right? Like, we were the good guys. And then I started reading the newsletters and stuff, and it's like, oh my God, this isn't the person that I want to be. This is certainly the person that I used to be, but I can't vote for Donald Trump. I don't know if any of you guys have ever had like that boyfriend that you were in love with, or somebody that was like a role model to you, and then it turns out that they're a creep. Like for me in my childhood, Bill Cosby was a really big deal because I grew up with the Huxtables, and when it turned out that he had been such an abuser of women, that was really hard for me to grapple with, to see that role model fall from grace. That is how I felt about the Republican Party, and especially about Donald Trump. And I think in a lot of ways it was so hard for me because then I had to look at myself and realize, oh my God, I was one of these people until like literally like 10 minutes ago. And no, I'm not. So who am I? And what do I even do? In a lot of ways, leaving MAGA, I can't even talk, and leaving the Republican Party was harder than the end of my 24-year marriage and realizing that my ex-husband had this double life and that he was a jerk and that I hadn't even like known half of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes. And then like, well, now what, am I just going to be alone for the rest of my life? Because it's really hard to picture a future outside of who you've been and who you've been with. And obviously we don't have a crystal ball. So stepping away from the Republican Party was terrifying to me because then it's like, but the Democrats, they're on the wrong side of everything, right? I had always believed that they were the evil people. They were murdering babies. So I was kind of like, maybe I'm just going to be nothing. I started volunteering for the RFK campaign for a little bit because that was kind of a neutral ground for me. But then, I don't know, he wasn't going to win and his stuff was just getting wilder and wilder. And so what I did one day was I just sat down with the computer. I had a couple of hours and I started looking at the actual platforms of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And I realized, first of all, I don't care about parties and I don't care that much about nationalism, patriotism, things like that, because at this point in my life, I'm so concerned about just other humans that being American or Chinese or Mexican or whatever means very little to me. I feel like political parties are just a means to an end so that we can have cohesive civilizations with some sort of rules. I always say that I'm an anarchist, and I mean that deeply. If an asteroid hit us tomorrow, only a few of us remained, and we returned to just tribalism, that'd be fine with me. Anyway, as I started to read through what the Democratic Party stood for, I realized this stuff aligns a lot with me, and I really don't support unfettered capitalism either. It's not just political parties. I didn't align with the Republican economically. I don't believe in trickle-down economics. All the data shows that it caused a lot of problems for us. That was really a hard reckoning too because I had had a lot of money. We had been business owners and I had been really opposed to any type of social systems. I always thought my husband works really hard for money. Why does he have to pay taxes to pay for some loser who's too lazy to go out and get a job? That's on them. But I'm a different person now. So the presidential election happens, and I go into a booth and vote for Kamala Harris, a mixed-race female Democrat who supports abortion and gay rights. It was so wild. Like, I had this out-of-body experience. And then the summer, that town hall happened, and I just told Kevin, I just want to go. I want to see what this is all about. I feel like I really align with the Democratic Party. And I love Gabby Giffords. She was actually shot just a couple of miles away from where I'm sitting right now. And that was a tragedy that impacted our entire community. And I went to that town hall and I have never felt more aligned with a group of people in my entire life. And not because somebody told me that I should be and that's what I'm supposed to believe in, but adult me, my 51-year-old self, who has critically thought and had therapy and listened to my own inner voice and knows the things that I value. What I found in that town hall that night was a group of other people who value the same things that I value. I know this video is long and full of tears. I just wanted to point out a couple of the challenges that I faced in transitioning my political identity. First of all, I have been raised in a system where there's always charismatic leaders that are extremely strong. And it was really confusing being in this last election and seeing that the Democratic Party is completely unraveling. And Joe Biden was so old that there wasn't a snowball's chance in hell that I wanted to vote for him. I actually considered moving to Canada or Mexico and just taking my kids and my family away. I've carefully researched other nations across the world that might be a better fit for us. But I have a grandbaby and I have so many people that I love here. And I think that the lack of strong leadership has been the greatest challenge for me. By the way, Gavin Newsom, if you're watching, please respond to the emails that I've sent you. I've talked to a bunch of other senators since I last said that on my last video. Newsom, I would like to volunteer my services as an influencer and as somebody who has keen insight into the MAGA party and Christian nationalism and Mormonism to you, should you happen to run for president. So reach out. I am volunteering. I think the second greatest challenge has been just being the enemy to all of the people that were formerly my community. My entire family has shunned me. I have almost no remaining friends because those who were Mormon didn't want me in their life because I'm an apostate. And those who were MAGA and preppers and Christian nationalists and all of that obviously no longer want me in their life because I'm a Benedict Arnold. I am a woke, liberal, feminist, atheist who talks about everything online. So I've lost all of my community, and that's been an extreme challenge. The third scariest thing about all of this has been realizing that my former party is now in charge of the country, and that has caused me so much anxiety. And it's one of the things, honestly, that prompts me to use my voice online every day like I do. Like, I left the Republican Party, I left MAGA, I left Christian nationalism and all of that. And now they're the guys in charge, and I know them intimately from the inside out. I have firsthand experience into how their twisted little brains work and the hatred that prompts everything that they do. And it terrifies me to see what's happened just in the first little bit of Donald Trump's presidency. It's not like I left MAGA behind and became a Democrat, and now we have, like Barack Obama or somebody in charge. I'm scared. I'm scared because I know them. And I know them because I was them. I guess I should share some benefits. The first one is just that feeling of authenticity that I have. Like, I am aligned with my core. I'm not just following the prophet. I'm not just following my group around me. I'm living the most aligned and congruous life that I've ever lived before. And if I had to wait until age 49 to do that, worth it. Because I think that some people go their whole lives without actually living authentically. And in addition to the authenticity, I have so much peace and connection and love for the people around me that I never had before. My life is no longer based on hate and fear. And now that I'm no longer in a community that's based on hate and fear, I truly have the best relationships that I've ever had in my entire life. My partner, Kevin, is absolutely incredible. We've been together for almost 6.5 years now. And while I have a very small circle of friends, the friends that I do have are some of the kindest, most amazing, most purpose-driven people that I've ever had in my entire life. And thankfully, I am rebuilding my own personal identity bit by bit. And I have to say that I'm actually happy with who I am now. Lastly, I took in a lot of people who still say that I look like I could be on Fox News, and why do I still look like the Mormon girl in MAGA? That's how I'm comfortable, and it wouldn't be authentic to me if I dyed my hair purple, or I did a nose ring for a while. It didn't work. I might tattoo my hands here coming up soon. I just don't have the money. Maybe if my whole life take two had happened when I was in my 20s and 30s, then I wouldn't still look so MAGA Mormon-y. But you guys, I'm 51. I don't really want to change my whole appearance. And I am blonde. I am Scandinavian, German, British. This is just who I am. I want to end with this final thought. On my Life Take Two podcast, when I have people on to interview, I ask them, if you of today could go back to 19-year-old you and tell that person anything, what would you tell them? And I wish that 51-year-old Jenny could go back to 19-year-old Jenny and just tell her, use those critical thinking skills and look inside and see how things are making you feel. That's the key to everything. That day that I left the Mormon church, I stood there in the hallway after I'd left that class, and I thought to myself, if this was the first time that I'd ever come to this church and I didn't have 44 years invested in it, would I want to come a second week? And the answer was no. I wish that 19-year-old me had been able to assess the things around me and really see the impact that they were having on myself and others, because it would have changed the course of my life completely. And I want to end this with a call to action for anybody who's still listening. Having been part of this movement, I know that these people will stop at nothing to fulfill their purposes. They believe that God is on their side, and they crave power in ways that most people would never even dream of. We have to fight. We have to fight at the polls. It's time for good people to decide to run for office. We need an army of politicians ready to step into public service. If you're not ready to do that, start financially supporting good politicians around. Even contributing just a little bit of money to campaigns can help. Speak up, speak out, do all that you can. We have to get power away from these people, or we are literally stepping into the handmaid's tale. That was my personal fantasy as a Mormon. I wanted an American theocracy, and I saw that potentially happening with Mitt Romney, and then it didn't. All right, that's it. Let me take a drink some water and take a nap. I will be cruising through the comments a little bit in this one. Thank you for watching. Bye, guys.